Hello and welcome to the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kjerulf. On today's episode, we are going to be joined by Alexander Kjerulf, the founder and chief happiness officer of Woohoo Inc. and one of the world's leading experts on happiness at work. Diana and Alex are going to explore how leadership and happiness are intertwined and how asking, is this person's life better? And how that can serve as a beacon to each leader's choices in communication with their team members. They're also going to consider the importance of deliberate and thoughtful communication and the role of addressing disconnections to both preempt and manage interpersonal conflicts. Now, let's have a conversation.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Soft Skills Salon, an audible think tank on soft skills. I'm your host, Diana Kjerulf. As I say, conversation is the currency of communication. Let's have a conversation. Today, I am absolutely delighted and remarkably thankful to Alexander Kjerulf. How'd I do, Alexander?
That was very, very good. Very good.
Thank you for that.
Are you sure you're not Danish?
I'm happy to be an honorary Dane, if I may, but if that's possible, let's talk about that later. Alexander is the founder and chief happiness officer of Woohoo Inc. and one of the world's leading experts on happiness at work. He is an author and speaker, presenting and conducting workshops on happiness at work, at businesses and conferences in almost 50 countries. Some of his clients have included Hilton, Microsoft, and IKEA. Welcome, 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 Alexander. And I am so pleased that you are here. Hello.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So Alexander has worked the podcast circuit before, and I am so pleased that he spent a few moments pre-selecting a question or two that would start our conversation that we're going to have right now. And that first question is, what does success leading others look like to you? So, Alexander, what are your thoughts?
Given that my field is happiness at work, it's probably not surprising that I'm going to say that for me, the main success factor in leading other people is making them happy. And I'm not necessarily talking about making them ecstatic every second of every day. If you want to lead other people, you sometimes still need to have tough conversations that might not be fun in the moment. But overall, if you're leading somebody else and their lives are not better, richer, more fun, more interesting, and happier due to your leadership, then you have failed as a leader. And of course, I hardly need to say this. There are absolutely leaders who run their people down. There are many leaders in business who make their employees stressed, fearful, shameful, nervous. Belittle them, put them down, make them doubt their own competencies and skills, even doubt their own worth as human beings. That is terrible. And that's why I think the main hallmark of good leadership is this person's life better because of the leadership? It really is. It really is. It's not easy, but it is a fairly simple definition of good leadership.
Absolutely. I appreciate in particular the original comment that you made about how happiness doesn't necessarily have to be at a constant level of any point, right? People often will assume that there's this ecstatic or extreme that is the goal. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, the variation that you allude to. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, nobody is happy all the time. I mean, if somebody is ecstatic every second of every day, there's something wrong with them. Okay. and also, I think the goal here is long-term happiness. And sometimes long-term happiness requires short-term unhappiness, right? So if an employee is doing something wrong, you may need to sit down and correct them and say, here's what I've noticed. This is not working. Here's what I think you should do differently. And those conversations are not fun. Those are tough to have for everybody. They won't make you happy in the moment. But once you've done that in the correct way and people get to fix their behavior, then they can be happy long term. And not correcting bad behavior is a recipe for unhappiness down the road. So yeah, I mean, this idea that everybody can be completely happy all the time is completely this so superficial and wrong.
Right, right. A bit of a myth, perhaps. Would you agree?
There are some people who argue that you can. The people who are very much into positive thinking and just choose to be happy, and you can be happy every second of every day, and it's just that's not how human beings work.
I'm reminded in your observations of an expression that my mother used to use about, she'd say they're called growing pains, not growing pickles. And growing pains, it's hopefully tolerable, as you suggest, in terms of that short-term, long-term approach to defining happiness. However, they are still growing pains, perhaps, in that uncomfortable conversation or in that finite interaction with an eye towards more of the strategic relationship where there can be more successes in leading others. So absolutely, there's a difference between, in my understanding, some of the, pain versus tickles that can occur there.
Exactly. Great saying too, by the way. I love it.
Yeah, growing pains, not growing tickles. It's a keeper. Yeah. So
love that.
Another question that we have that we can consider together is, I think, a really important one. And that is, Alexander, what is your favorite way? So this is already asking you to do a little bit of selection amongst the ways that I know you have at your disposal. So what is your favorite way to solve interpersonal conflicts or problems on your team? Or perhaps by extension, I know you've been of great service to other organizations and their teams. What's your favorite way? What comes to mind?
I think the first of all, the most important thing is that you do handle it. That when there is conflict or tension, that we do address it, and we don't just wait for it to go away automatically, because it probably won't. It'll probably just get worse. My favorite example that I've seen in real life is from Southwest Airlines, where this is something they focus on a lot. And they actually train their managers in conflict resolution skills. So if there has been a conflict in between some employees, somebody from this team, somebody from that team, a plane was late, and they're like, the flight attendants may blame the ground crew, or the ground crew blames the pilots, or whatever. Right. They're actually trained in bringing those employees in for a meeting. And now they are from the U.S., they are from Texas, so it's called a come to Jesus meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. And because they're just very, very good at bringing out, finding out, so what was going on, what was happening, instead of who's to blame. What often happens is that people come out of these meetings with an improved relationship, with a better understanding of the other person, instead of a deepening conflict, and with a better understanding of how we fix this problem the next time we see it. So I think this approach, you got to do something about it. So sitting people down and giving them a chance to talk about what went wrong, not who's to blame, but what happened, I think is fantastic.
I would say to you, Alexander, that there is an enormous space between who is to blame and what happened.
Yeah.
And whether you call it come to Jesus or triangulation is one of the terms that are often used, or a difficult conversation, or just a meeting of any sort as an example of conflict identification and resolution.
Yeah.
I agree with you so strongly that when it comes to that space, who is to blame versus what happened, oftentimes who is to blame is actually a source of conflict in and of itself, in addition to what may or may not have happened. Has that resonated in your experience?
Oh, absolutely. As long as we're stuck in that, people get defensive, right? And it's a rare problem where it's only one person's fault. Usually it's a little bit your fault and a little bit my fault, and let's figure out, and let me apologize for my part, and you get a chance to apologize for your part in the mistake, whatever it was. Yeah. So absolutely, yeah. And it's very, very important. I think it's crucial to have that attitude that everybody makes mistakes. Does not make you a bad person. And this understanding that we all screw up once in a while, I think is essential. And then how do we move on from there?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the concept of everyone making mistakes on occasion when I'm working with groups, I'll make some sort of comment about how this does assume that everyone you are working with or for or around is human. So
Yeah.
let's double check. Although alien life is welcome, this is an all-inclusive time. However, this does assume that this is humans that we're talking about or that we are working with or for or by. And as humans, I know as a sample human myself, I am remarkably wrong on a frequency that I'm very comfortable with.
Yeah, I love that.
And, Alexander, I think also that, to quote you, everybody, pardon me, does make mistakes. And I would say to you that same concept has, in this COVID era, been brought into what many people refer to as psychological safety at work. Is that a phrase that you're familiar with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a hugely important concept.
I think everyone making mistakes is a part of that. It's not necessarily the most attractive part of psychological safety to some of us. Do you agree? Is it a part of it?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, imagine if you were not allowed to make mistakes. Actually, I've seen this in practice. We have done a lot of work with the Danish government sector, and in many government workplaces, they have an explicitly stated zero fault policy.
Oh.
So their policy is we never make mistakes. And I have seen firsthand the fear that causes in people. People constantly second guessing themselves, constantly double checking themselves and each other's work, their own and each other's work. And I've also seen what happens when they do make mistakes, because they still make mistakes. Surprise. They are, as you say, not aliens. They are in fact humans. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is that nobody can own up to their mistakes. You either have to hide your mistake or blame it on somebody else, and that creates a constant state of trench warfare between employees, between teams. Every time something goes wrong, so that is just a dumb policy. Whereas if we can I share an example? As a wonderful example. Do you know the conductor Ben Zander?
Not well, but by name, yes.
Yeah. So he's phenomenal. He used to be the conductor of the Boston Philharmonics, and now he's a teacher. And on YouTube, you can find these master classes that he does with young, talented musicians. And one of the things he's noticed is that when he's training one of them and they make a mistake, they become so flustered, and their whole body language becomes tense. Like, oh my God, I made a mistake, and I'm in front of this famous conductor. I'm a terrible person. So he will actually train with them to relax and enjoy their playing more. And also, and I think it's fantastic, if you do make a mistake in practice, not in concert, but in practice, he teaches them to stop playing, throw up your arms and say, "How fascinating." It's just to relax you in that moment, right?
Right.
So I think there's huge psychological safety in realizing that we all screw up once in a while.
Absolutely. And that non-combative but inclusive approach to that. Honestly, to circle back to your very first point about needing to address the conflict in some way, what I often hear, and certainly hear echoes of in your comments, is that while we can focus on individual instances, and I'm a big proponent of the value of a conversation, at the same time, these are cultural, these are macro level, team, I would even go so far as organization wide spaces, right? That social space in which I can throw up my hands and say, how fascinating, even though I might be feeling shame or I might be feeling some self-doubt. That's bigger than me, right? So I think there's a lot there about how we contribute, especially as leaders potentially, in how conflict at a team level versus just looking at the finger pointing, if it's who to blame at the individual level. There's a lot of richness that we haven't really even explored. I love those examples.
Oh, absolutely. And to address that organizational level, I think one of the most powerful things is having leadership at the top who are not afraid to admit their mistakes, and publicly say, here, we did this. we goofed. We're so sorry. I heard want to hear a fantastic example about that?
Sure.
So this is from a big logistics company where the top leadership, they do a road trip around the world to all of their locations once a year. And they have an award for at the end when there's question time, an award for most critical question. Oh. So if an employee stands up and says, you said you were going to do that, you didn't, you failed. Instead of management getting all defensive and being like, well, blah 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 blah, they actually have an award. It's a little statue of a cow, a little cow figurine to show that there are no sacred cows. And they will actually, instead of getting defensive, they'll say, yeah, you're right. You know what? You're right. We said this was going to be the strategy. We completely failed. We're so sorry. Here, you get this statuette. A good way to show that, upper management are not aliens either. They're human beings Absolutely. As well. They also make mistakes.
I think that's a great example. I love the language in that most critical question. And it's a great segue to our next question, which is, how do you provide feedback to others? For example, colleagues, staff, or leadership. And I would suggest to you that on occasion, critical feedback is a part of either our reluctance to engage in feedback altogether. Sophistication. What would you say?
I would say that, first of all, I would say that people need feedback. Yes. And people are crying out for feedback in most workplaces. I would also say that we need to over-communicate the positive feedback as much as possible, because people need to know what they're doing right. There is a ton of research on what positive feedback does for us. And in many workplaces, people just don't get it. They're not, as long as they're doing their jobs well, nobody says anything. But if they ever make a mistake, then they're instantly punished. And that's not a good situation. That's not a good state of affairs. So we absolutely need to over-focus on the positive feedback, and tell people, you can praise what people do well. You can praise their good positive qualities. Right. You can praise their effort at work. I see you working really hard. Thank you so much. But the important thing is that people are getting a ton of positive feedback. And then, of course, when something goes wrong, we need to address that as well and say, hey, the last report you wrote, honestly, wasn't very good. The conclusion was muddled. I thought this whole section, I just couldn't understand what you're trying to say. And whatever. For both good and negative feedback, I think it's good that it is specific. So not just you're awesome or you suck, but here's why you're awesome and here's why you suck. I would never tell people they suck, by the way. I think it's important that it's specific. I think it's important that it's constructive. It's about building people up and not tearing them down. And I think it's important that it's genuine. Don't criticize people just to criticize them. Criticize them because there's a reason. Also, don't praise people just to praise them. Praise them if there is a reason. It needs to be genuine. And then I would say one of the main differences is that it's fine to praise people in public. But criticism, negative feedback, you always, always, always give in private. I cannot stress this clearly enough, that you never tear somebody else down in front of their peers. It's I've seen it done. It's terrible.
Absolutely. There's a lot in what you've just offered. And so many leaders can function on a no news is good news basis in terms of feedback. And I've worked with so many leaders who believe that is feedback. I've got nothing to say. Therefore, things are okay. It might be bad news. And there couldn't be more of a vacuum there, as you suggested, that is available to be filled with specific language that ideally is an indication of there having been some interaction, right? To your point, Alexander, in order for me to give specific feedback, the insinuation there, the connotation is that I have something specific that I have observed or that we have engaged in, or that there's a point of intersection from which I can provide you a specific observation. So that's partially where some of this feedback is a little elusive to many people. I agree with you. There's so much work around there, and I see so many leaders just thinking that they know what they're doing by not engaging in feedback at all.
Yeah. I have a fantastic book. I can see it on my bookshelf over there called Hug Your People. By Jack something, I forget his name. Owner of a couple of really upscale clothes stores in New England. And he did a cool thing. He put every morning when he went to work, he put 10 coins in his right trouser pocket. And every time he remembered to give positive feedback to one of his employees, he'd move one coin to the other pocket. And he couldn't leave work until that pocket was empty. Just do it, right? It's a skill that you can pick up like anything else, and it has there's a ton of research on this, on the positive effect it has on people.
I believe it's Jack Mitchell. Jack
Mitchell, exactly. I met the man. He was lovely.
And what a lovely way to also bring a tally to your own experience of behaviors, right? Keeping track and so on. What a great example. So, and thank you for that recommended resource. So Hug Your People by Jack Mitchell. Appreciate that, Alexander.
Such a great book.
I will put that on my reading list. I am always on the hunt for a new book like that.
Yes.
The last piece that I would ask you to consider is if there is a potential future guest that you can recommend to us at the podcast. Now, you're welcome to give a shout out, or you're welcome to follow up with me later. That's up to you. But we do ask as a exit note, at least the thought that perhaps there is a future guest that could also enlighten the listeners that we have around soft skills and their experience.
I might connect you to my good friend Mush Panjwani, who is the founder of a chain of coffee shops in Pakistan. He's on my mind because I just spoke to him this morning, and he is amazing. And the culture that he's created in his coffee shops, he trains all of his staff on happiness. He has a gender-inclusive hiring policy. So he will hire men, women, and transgender people in Pakistan, of all places. Okay. He is phenomenal and one of the most energetic and enthusiastic people I know. He would be a phenomenal guest to talk about soft skills.
I'm going to take you up on that offer. And I can tell you, I do have the privilege, like yourself, in over the years working with many, many people. And I can honestly not remember encountering someone named Mush. So
Mush, exactly.
I like to meet my first Mush. And I appreciate very much both your time, your insights, and all of the fantastic words that you've shared with both me and all of our listeners today. Thank you again, Alexander.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for a great conversation.
No problem. Until next time. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you very much for listening to another dynamic and informative episode of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Please consider subscribing to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we also encourage you to visit our website and social media links, which you can find in the show's notes. We look forward to bringing you another episode. And remember, conversation is the currency of communication. Bye for now.